is the number one pushback I get from parents is that when I say you need to talk to your kids when they're young, like 6, 7, 8 years old. But I always try to remind parents that you want to talk to them like ahead of first-time exposure. So if first-time exposure is between the age of 8 and 11, statistically, like that means we have to do it at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So I'm not just pulling it out of a hat. Like there's a reason, even though I also know it feels so scary. And parents, we want to maintain that innocence, right? And in the book, I say like a parent really said to me, like, I'm having a hard time like telling my kid the truth about the tooth fairy. Like, how are you expecting me to talk about porn, right? Like this just feels too much for their little brain. And I remember feeling like an upset stomach. I don't want to talk to my young kids about this. I completely relate. But when you think about if you give them the tools so that they know what to do if they see pornography, there's such a better chance that they will come back to you if it happens to them and say, hey, I think I saw porn. Can you help me? Because you've told them what to expect and how to respond. And that is so important. You're not giving them details. You give them the least amount of details to stay the most safe. Like you're not saying any kind of details about pornography except for the most basic definition. Like pornography is people with no clothes on in movies or in books, or a picture or a movie, people with no clothes on. That's all you say. You're not giving them details. But just that little bit of information can help them stay safe. So I understand the fear, but I think the importance of, just like you would tell a kid, don't touch a hot stove because you will get burned. You don't think, well, if I tell them, then they will know about burns, and burns are terrible. Like I don't want them to know that. Well, of course, burns are terrible. That's why we tell them don't touch the hot stove. Like the impact of them seeing pornography is horrible. So we have to tell them what to do. That's why we have to do it at a young age, as scary as it is.
Was there anything that helped you in particular with overcoming that fear?
Well, I mean, of course, personal experience, seeing, that neither Erin or I were really equipped to deal with what to do with porn exposure. And we had no tools really as kids or young adults. And so recognizing that could have been help. And I think another really important thing here besides the fear is the shame, because shame keeps us quiet. And for so many of us, we don't want to talk to our kids about porn because it is a painful or shameful subject in our own life, whether because we've used it, we're using it, or someone we love has or is. So we don't know how to talk about it. So I think addressing the fear and the shame, that those are tools Satan is using to keep us quiet. And so I just had to say, okay, I'm going to do this as hard as it is. But when I finally had the conversation with my kids, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, because to them, it was just another thing mom was saying for how they would stay safe. It wasn't so bad for them. It was hard for me, but for them, it was just like, oh yeah. And now I would say with our fourth kid is so comfortable that sometimes, because we've talked about it so much, that sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, wait, you are way too comfortable with this conversation. We might need to put the brakes on a little. So it gets easier and easier.
Yeah. Well, and there's that's where I think it's helpful to think in terms of, a preemptive strategy along with a reactive strategy, because we don't want to merely react when it hits our kids. We want to preempt that. We want to lead, and I think in that we're leading the way for them. Yeah. Because we're going to have to react. There's going to be times where things just happen, and you have to react. But on this one, we can also kind of frame the conversation from the get-go, because the conversation about porn doesn't start with porn. It starts with human sexuality and God's design for sexuality. And God's design for sexuality starts with family and kids and marriage. And that starts with the cultural mandate that he's given us. It starts with Genesis 1. And so I think that's helpful for us to think about as parents, is that it's not merely, okay, now I got to talk to my kids about this particular issue, But all throughout my discipleship of my kids,
Mm.
I'm laying a foundation for them, a worldview foundation that is going to prepare them with the necessary framework to make sense of porn. And so it's Genesis 1, we're made in God's image. He makes us male and female. He gives us a command to fill the earth, multiply, and fill the earth, and then we're off. And Genesis 2, we become one as husband and wife to help do that. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
That we need to be talking with our kids and helping them to see that from the earliest of ages, and we can celebrate that goodness. And then as we get into Genesis 3, talk about the fall of man. And okay, here's going to be the brokenness that we see. And it can start with those kind of more general conversations. And then as they get older, 6, 7, 8, we're having more specific conversations. So, and one thing that's so helpful is that you give specific questions and then verses to memorize, which I think is really good. So there's some really practical tools here to help any parent out there who's scared of this conversation to just ease your way into it.
Yeah, I think that piece that you're talking about, Brett, and that you bring up in the book, Greta, is it's not, the conversations aren't just all negative. This is all the bad stuff.
Yeah.
It's God's story, God's design is better. And then, yeah, Satan and our own sin in our lives, we take what God's made, we twist it, we mess it up. And none of us are above the ability to do that. But I love that balance, because that's how I think we avoid the trap of just being the people who say, no, 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 no
Right.
to everything.
Yeah.
And we're explaining it's this better yes that we're saying too. And I think it's just oftentimes what young people don't hear enough in the church. It's connecting it to our worldview, our design, the goodness of it. Because the sin part, especially as our kids get older, everyone's aware of. It's more the beauty part that I think sometimes we lose.
Yeah.
And so that's you bring that up in the book and we talk about it here, but the not forgetting the beautiful part of the story.
Yeah, and this is where I think the concern that a lot of parents have of, if I even talk about this subject, I will strip them of their innocence. Well, what the biblical worldview tells us is that sex, the conversation about sex itself, is not going to strip them of their innocence, because sex is part of God's good design.
Yes, totally.
So unless you're, and this is probably helpful for parents to think about, what baggage are you bringing into this? What baggage are we all bringing into this conversation, such that I don't want to address this stuff. I think just the conversation will strip them of their innocence, because I want to say this conversation goes straight back to Scripture, God's plan for humanity. Sex is part of that original design. It's a good thing. So if you're talking about God's good gifts, you're not going to strip them of their innocence, right? When parents raise that to you, is there anything in particular you help them with, and in terms of, I'm scared, I will introduce this to them, and then they'll go down that path, and I will have been at fault for this?
Well, I think that God designed us, we all know God designed us as sexual creatures. So there is going to be, at some point for every kid, questions about sex and sexuality. And I would rather be the one to have those conversations with them than Google or their friends or somebody else, anybody else. Like, I want to be the one to talk about it with them. So I would like that to be, even when it comes to the conversation of pornography, that I'm the one who has the initial conversation. They understand from me that it's dangerous, it's not good for them, and that I give them the information of what to do if they see it. Because the reality is, they could be doing an innocent search on Google for, a picture that they want to draw. Or maybe they are curious and they heard a word while they were on a sports team and they Google it. And then they find so much more than they could have ever imagined. Because like you think about when we were kids and we wanted to find out something about sex, we heard a term. We could look it up in a dictionary, we could look it up in an encyclopedia, but there was a limit to what we could find. For kids now, there is really no limit, which is horrifying. And so we don't want them to go to someone else. We want them to come to us so that we're the ones having that conversation, because the reality is the loss of innocence, that the potential for loss of innocence is so much greater if we say nothing than if we have that conversation with them. Because again, we're not giving them details. We're just really giving them a plan for what to do if they see porn. As they get older, then yes, there are more details and there are more significant conversations that we're going to have. But especially those young years where parents are so concerned, we just give them the little bit of information to keep them the most safe.
Yeah. And this is where we can go on the offense because we have the truth. And we can confidently move forward with the truth and play some offense, not just defense.
Okay, so let's talk about defense a little bit. And some dear friends of ours, their son's first exposure was, I think he was 10, but it was waiting to be picked up from a sporting event, and a teammate had an iPad.
Yeah.
And so he's just waiting there for mom and dad, and he sees the porn on the iPad. And so help a parent think through, okay, defense-wise, what do we do? And you do talk about it in the book, but give us a glimpse of now what do we do? Whether it's they were searching something and...
like get advice for that parent. Let's say that's the scenario. That parent comes to you and says, this is what happened.
This is what happened.
What would you say to that
How
parent?
do we handle that conversation?
First, I would say to if this was my son or daughter, I am so glad you told me. Thank you. And I'm really sorry for what you saw. You are probably feeling like maybe scared right now or really uncomfortable. You might feel sad. You might also feel curious about what you saw, like have some questions. And I just want you to know that I am here and I'm going to help you answer. I will answer any questions you have. I love you. I'm not upset with you. If at all possible, if they're open to it, give them a hug, hold them, like have physical contact, because you want to like establish connection in that moment when they are feeling probably a lot of different things. And so are you. As a parent, I always invite parents to pray ahead of time, like not ahead of time in the moment, but ahead of time in years. Like, Lord, when this conversation comes, will you prepare me to be calm, to show the fruit of your spirit to my kid, gentleness, peace, kindness, like to show those things to my child in that moment when I might not be feeling those things. And then you're going to get into more detail, but you might even wait like a day to give them time before you're like, okay, can you tell me, was this the only time you saw something? Because you need to assess, like, is this the only time you ever saw this? Was it a movie? You want to know the depth of what they've been exposed to. And then in this case, you don't really need to like say, well, we're going to set up a tech plan in the house of how to keep you safe, because this was outside of his control or her control. But you could say, hey, if this ever happens again, here's what I want you to do. And it'll keep you safe from this sort of situation. If you see kids hanging out, just looking at their iPads, maybe go stand somewhere else. And let them know, like, they're not at fault. You love them. You're on their team. I think it's really important to address the curiosity issue because, again, God designed us as sexual beings, so they could have had a reaction to what they saw, like a physical or emotional reaction. And you want them to know they're not in trouble for that. But you also want them to know if they have questions or they think like, I kind of want to know what that is. I want to know more about it, not to go seeking it themselves, but to come to tell you if they have those thoughts. That's a big thing that parents, we don't want to imagine our 10-year-old would feel that way. But again, that's how God made us. It's just Satan wanting to thwart that and twist it.